Hello everyone, it's Jabara here. There's a growing trend of people who claim to be descended from the original Native Americans, or pre-Columbian settlers. That's cool and all, but the only problem is, the people who are making these claims are black, or African Americans. While it is true that many African Americans possess Native American heritage, the average percent hovers only around about 0.8%. Perhaps the most frequent topic discussed in connection with blacks in the Americas during the pre-Columbian era relates to the famous colossal stone heads unearthed in Mexico in 1862 by Jose Melgar. Melgar and subsequent archaeologists pointed out seemingly Africanoid features such as wide nostrils, thick lips, and what appeared to be cornrows, as well as West African war helmets. They proposed that these were created in the image of pre-Columbian African explorers. These ideas were further popularized by the writings of a Guyanese-born professor, Dr. Ivan Sertima, and continue to be perpetuated by Dr. Clyde Winters, who pretty much claims that every single major world civilization was created by blacks. However, when compared to the facial features of indigenous people of the region, they are virtually identical, as these are genetic adaptations to tropical climates found in many diverse populations all around the world, not just Africans. The hair only looks like cornrows superficially, and can easily be ruled out as simple braids, common in many cultures of the Americas. There are also no giant stone heads to be found anywhere on the continent of Africa. If these were really made in the image of African explorers, you'd think that such a large, imposing, and complex artistic practice would also have been common in Africa too, if that's where it originated. The most popular argument is that Abu Bakr II of the Mali Empire traveled to the Americas, establishing settlements or teaching the Olmec what they know. This is quite easily explained away as well. While there is a high probability that this voyage actually did take place, it would have happened in 1311 CE, while the Olmec civilization dates back to anywhere between 1500 and 900 BCE, over 1,000 years prior to Bakari's voyage. Even if this voyage was proven without the shadow of a doubt to have taken place, there's still no conclusive evidence that it actually arrived in the Americas, as no evidence of his fleet, men, or settlements have been uncovered on American soil. Egypt is also credited as a possible originator of Olmec civilization. Construction of pyramids, mummification, similarities in religious practices, and the advent of writing systems are often presented as proof. However, these things can all be found all around the world, including those found in Indonesia. Olmec pyramids vary significantly from those in Egypt, being much shorter, wider, and flat at their tops, often containing buildings on their peaks. They also exclusively feature a stepped construction, a practice abandoned by Egyptians thousands of years prior in favor of smoothly sloping sides. The Olmec writing system is also completely and utterly different from those created in Egypt, and lacks even subtle similarities, pointing towards an undeniably independent development. Perhaps the biggest inconsistency with the pre-Columbian African contact theory is the fact that the peoples of the Americas had no old world goods, crops, or technology. Iron smelting was unknown in the whole of the Americas, and in fact, smelting of any kind was restricted to just the Andean civilizations of eastern South America, who only smelted precious metals and bronze alloys. While metallurgy was present elsewhere in the Americas, it was not smelted from raw ores, being cold forged from native outcroppings instead, and consisted of only copper, silver, and gold. In other words, it was not acquired from the crushing and melting down of metals from rocks in a furnace. It was also used exclusively for jewelry and ceremonial purposes, as opposed to tools, weapons, or armor, with few exceptions. Horses, cattle, and other beasts of burden were completely absent in the Americas until Columbus's voyages took place. Important Old World crops like wheat, coffee, tea, and rice were completely missing. No metal tools, weapons, traditions, written records, inscriptions, or skeletal remains of Old World explorers can be found in the New World that predate Columbus's voyages, with the sole exception of the small sites excavated in Canada and Greenland that were briefly occupied by Vikings. So if African explorers were already here, why would they have not brought these things to the Americas? Another more radical niche of these pre-Columbian African theorists are the ones who believe that blacks are in fact the indigenous people of the Americas, contrary to the Bering Strait theory. One of the more questionable reasons provided is the fact that all of humanity began in Africa. While this is true, that doesn't mean that Native Americans were black. Native Americans left Asia over 15,000 years ago. According to that logic, all humans in the world should be black, not just indigenous Americans, since all humans began in Africa. And it's pretty obvious that not everyone's black. In addition to this, the original humans likely did not resemble modern West Africans or Bantu peoples at all. While it is true that the original human populations that left Africa most likely had darker skin, they did not resemble modern West Africans. This can be confirmed based on the bone structure and facial reconstructions of skeletons uncovered in places like Europe and Asia. It is much more probable that these early humans had features comparable to Khoi and San peoples of southern Africa, whom are among the most ancient continuous human populations in the world. Australian Aboriginals are also among one of the oldest human populations, being virtually isolated from the rest of humanity for upwards of 50,000 years, and aside from skin color, look very different from most sub-Saharan Africans, and being more related genetically with people of southern India. The only merit to the theory of indigenous black natives would be the discovery of the oldest skeleton in the Americas, formerly displayed in the Brazilian National Museum known as the Luzia woman. Through facial reconstruction, scientists concluded that she bore features atypical of Native Americans. Similar skeletons were later unearthed in the same region, resembling Luzia. Their physical features more closely resemble Khoisan peoples and other archaic human groups, rather than West Africans or Mongoloids. Some scientists and universities also claim that she has Negroid traits, but it is very common for people to blindly classify Africans, Negritos, and Aboriginals into the same category, despite their vastly different genetic makeups. This is more evident in the term Negroid itself, with the prefix Negro meaning black, while the prefixes in Caucasoid and Mongoloid denote specific regions around the world rather than their skin color, with Caucasoids being proposed to have originated around the Caucasus Mountains, and Mongoloids believing to have originated around Mongolia. There are a small percentage of modern scientists, however, who have abandoned the term Negroid in favor of Congoid, denoting the Congo region of Africa. With that said, there is a tendency of incorrectly categorizing them based on skin color or the size of their nasal cavity, despite the fact that both of these are genetic adaptations to hot or tropical weather. Similar to how many North American natives, the real North American natives, have long, narrow, and often hooked noses, and adaptations to cold weather and a trait commonly associated exclusively with Caucasoid peoples. Native Americans, on the other hand, fall within the Mongoloid group. Among the biggest questions for this theory of original black Native Americans are, why don't any black people of North or South America speak any Native American languages? Why are these languages spoken exclusively by people who are copper-skinned, straight-haired Mongoloids? Also, why do blacks have the same genetic disorders and attributes of people from Africa like sickle cell anemia, G6PD deficiency, and tightly coiled hair? All traits that are virtually non-existent in Native Americans, Europeans, or Asians. And why didn't blacks die from old world diseases like the copper-skinned peoples did, whom only make up 2% of the current population of the United States as a result of it? Why does virtually all indigenous art of the Americas portray physical features of these peoples instead of blacks? Even Olmec art, the creators of the giant stone heads. The overwhelming majority of their art is created in the image of these people, bearing features that are undeniably Native American. People throughout the black diaspora have undeniable linguistic and religious links with Africa. For example, people of the Caribbean speak a Creole known as patois. It is somewhat of a Creole of English and African languages, with so many borrowed words and sentence structures directly from African languages that a native speaker of English would have trouble understanding. Patois is so different from normal English that it's a wonder that it's not considered its own language to begin with, instead of being considered a mere dialect. Most of these similarities can be directly traced back to the Tree language of the Akan people, which is where most slaves were imported from during Britain's colonial wars against the Ashanti Empire, located in the Gold Coast, or what is known today as Ghana. AAVE, or African American Vernacular, also contains several borrowed elements, including the absence of an R at the end of certain words, the use of double negatives, and even certain slang such as attributing the words cool or chill with something being good, relaxed, or calm. This was very common in several West African languages, but virtually absent in English until it was introduced by African slaves. Moving back to Egypt, and perhaps the most convincing evidence of pre-Columbian contact rests in the DNA samples of a group of mummies collectively known as the cocaine mummies. In 1992, DNA samples from these mummies were analyzed by German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova, revealing traces of cocaine and nicotine. While coca and tobacco are both indigenous American plant species, contamination of the samples has not yet been ruled out, as the practices of handling these sites was less standardized and more invasive during the time that these mummies were discovered. There are also other nicotine-bearing plants that are indigenous to the Old World and were well known in Egypt, such as tea and pepper. Nicotine is a compound produced by various different plant species to ward off insects. In fact, it has historically been used as a pesticide. With that said, out of all the evidence presented thus far, this is the most convincing evidence of Africans reaching the Americas in pre-Columbian times, but even then, it's very spotty. Lastly, the only skeletal evidence of undeniably African people found in the Americas were the whole base skeletons, 2 African male skeletons that were unearthed in the Virgin Islands in the year 1974. They were radiocarbon dated to sometime between 950 and 1250 CE. However, the site contained a mixture of Native American pottery and colonial-era coffin nails, which suggests that at least one of the skeletons was intrusive, while the site was also susceptible to seawater, which could have contaminated the remains. Thus, the tests remained inconclusive. In conclusion, there are countless theories and suggestions of blacks living in the Americas in pre-Columbian times, some pointing towards indigenous black populations, while others lean towards ancient African explorers. However, there is no solid evidence of African people existing in the Americas in pre-Columbian times. I personally feel like this theory has gained ground in a similar fashion to the Black Jew Israelite movement. Blacks in the West grow up in a society that treats them as though their history is irrelevant until the birth of the transatlantic slave trade, and that Africans were nothing more than hut-dwelling hunter-gatherers until modern times. Many blacks will respond to this by seeking some form of link with another culture that is more well-known and appreciated than Africans, all the while remaining ignorant of their actual civilizations that existed in Africa throughout history. They will try to find links to any and every culture around the world but their own, pretty much. To be honest, it saddens me, and I don't blame them for feeling this way, when raised in a society that treats them as if their history is worthless or irrelevant. I personally felt the same way when I was younger, but through my own research and initiative, I learned a lot about my ancestors and gained a humbling appreciation for it, and quite frankly, this humbling led to the creation of From Nothing. I feel like it's important to include real African history in movies, media, video games, and the likes, just as other cultures around the world are represented. This would show people of the black diaspora that they do in fact have a history to be proud of, and beautiful cultures and peoples to identify with, instead of living their entire lives angry and upset and stealing the history of other peoples. Thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget that if you'd like to join a Discord community of over 250 members who discuss topics like these all the time, simply follow the link provided below. Also, if you'd like to support in the creation of more videos like these, you can do so by becoming one of my patrons, also linked below. Becoming a patron also allows you to directly submit your own video requests. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and always remember, we don't come from nothing.